Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. So I went to the Drudge Report this morning, and I see that, well, what is it that they say? That it's always dumbest before the dawn? Something like that. Brazil, biological Fukushima. Wow, biological Fukushima. It sounds like an Irwin Allen movie, or at least the plot of an Irwin Allen movie from the 1970s. New variant each week, Bolsonaro downplays. CDC UK variant now dominant strain in USA. Hospitals seeing more young adults with severe symptoms. Alarm sounded over significant increase in Michigan. Detroit sending workers door to door to compel vaccines, presumably. Can they do that? Merkel calls for national lockdown. Restaurant owners clash with Rome police. Glad to hear that. Canadian church fenced off by authorities for breaking rules. More on that in a minute. 1 in 3 survivors suffer mental neurological problems. Yes, we're going to be hearing an awful lot more about that. People who've had COVID, young people who've had COVID or who believe they've had COVID are going to be complaining for years. It's going to be like chronic fatigue syndrome. This is from the London Sun. Biological Fukushima. Brazil COVID plague spawning super mutations every week that could destroy world's fight against pandemic. Hospitals are now at breaking point with people dropping dead as they await treatment amid the rise of super mutant strains. To Miguel Nicolilis, a former regional coordinator of the country's pandemic response team, he described Brazil's response to the crisis as a complete calamity. It's the largest human tragedy in Brazilian history, he said. Compared to which other ones, by the way? People just started dying in Brazil. Brazil is a very popular country. The University of Washington released another estimate, and the University of Washington's modeling has just been impeccable, has it not? The UW released another estimate suggesting if the rate of transmission goes up by 10%, we could get to 600,000 deaths. It's a nuclear reactor that has set off a chain reaction and is out of control. It is a biological Fukushima. It's not a nuclear reactor. It has not set off a chain reaction. It is nothing like those things. His comment was a reference to the shocking explosion of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan, sparked by a tsunami in 2011. Actually, it was sparked by an earthquake, which was of a magnitude that is not supposed to happen. So, yes, and the Mail also leads with biological Fukushima. And let's go to Ontario, where we have learned that ultra-right-wing Premier Doug Ford is so afraid of his medical establishment, the latrine wallas, that he is determined to just institute lockdown after lockdown after lockdown. And I suppose after all the businesses die in Ontario, there'll be no need for lockdowns because there won't be any place for people to spend any money. This is from Catherine de Klerk at CTV News. Ontario issues stay-at-home order and declares third state of emergency. The stay-at-home order will go into effect at 12:01 a.m. Thursday and last 28 days. I can't stress this enough, he said. Things are extremely, extremely serious right now, and I'm extremely concerned. The situation is evolving rapidly, hour by hour. And as things change, as we learn more about these deadly new variants, as we see new problems arise, we need to adapt. We need to move quickly and decisively. And right now, above all else, our plan is to get needles in the arms and protect our hospitals. Yes, the hospitals aren't there to protect us. We are there to protect the hospitals. That's why today, on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, I'm declaring a state of emergency. During this time, all non-essential retailers will close to in-person shopping, in-person dining will be prohibited, and gyms and personal care services will be shuttered. Big box stores will be allowed to remain open only to sell essential goods. Shopping malls will be limited to curbside pickup via appointment and delivery. A select group of stores will be allowed to remain open by appointment only, with a 25% capacity limit. This includes safety supply stores, businesses that primarily sell, rent, or repair assistive devices, rental and leasing services, including automobiles and equipment, optical stores that sell prescription eyewear, businesses that sell motor vehicles and boats, vehicle and equipment repair, and retail stores operated by a telecommunications provider or services. Doug Ford tweeted, effective Thursday, April 8th, 12:01 a.m., Ontario is imposing a province-wide stay-at-home order. My question for Premier Doug Ford would be, are you staying at home? And if not, why not? Why is it necessary for Doug Ford to leave his home and possibly contaminate others or be contaminated himself? Ford said, to boil it down as simple as possible, folks, please stay home unless it is for an essential reason. The situation is extremely serious, and we just need to hunker down right now. We need to limit mobility. Well, seeing as the Latrine-wallahs are in charge in Ontario, again, couldn't Doug Ford just stay at home? Catch up on his Netflix or whatever? Ford added that the province doesn't have enough police officers to chase people down, but asked everyone to cooperate with the stay-at-home order. Meanwhile, Solicitor General Sylvia Jones told reporters that the measures will be enforced. It's critical now, more than ever, that people adhere to the orders and follow public health measures. I'm not seeing anything in this story about liquor stores. Kind of curious to me because they have stayed open the whole time. I suspect that they're going to remain open. If I'm wrong about this, please correct me in the chat, because that's something I don't think that people would put up with. Here's another story from the Canadian Press. Let's see whether they mention alcohol or liquor. Nope, they do not. Meanwhile, in Alberta, yes, panic. Alberta clamps down as COVID-19 variants threaten to swamp health system. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney said widespread rule breaking has forced his government to bring back tougher public health restrictions, and that failing to do so would cause variant COVID-19 cases to swamp the healthcare system by next month. Kenney acknowledged decisions to shut down indoor dining, curb indoor fitness, and reduce retail capacity will meet resistance, even within his own United Conservative Party and caucus. But the government cannot ignore the science, he said. We cannot dismiss the medical advice, and we cannot ignore the numbers. The death toll in the province also surpassed 2,000. Is that a lot? 2,000? I don't think that it's a lot, because, let's see, there are 4.4 million people in the province of Alberta. And in 2019, the last year for which we have complete numbers, 26,268 Albertans died. So for the, 15 months of COVID-19, 2,000 people have died. There are currently 76 people in ICUs in province. 76 people. This does not sound like a crisis to me. Janice Irwin, who describes herself as your ML Gay, Treaty 6, she's an Indian, a native Indian, is she? Something of a surprise to me. There's a picture of her, and you should do an image search on this person. Nothing weird about this person at all. 2,000 lives lost, 2,000 Albertans. It's entirely unconscionable that 15 UCP MLAs are willing to risk more deaths. You see, if only all the MLAs stood firm, there would be no more death in Alberta. Why is it so hard to make people understand this? Give your heads a shake and think about the impact of the message you're sending, and get control of your caucus, Jason Kenney, before it's too late. Yes, 15 members of Jason Kenney's caucus have sent him a letter publicly saying enough is enough. Our constituents aren't willing to put up with any more of this, which is good news, which is very good news. But meanwhile, in Alberta, Jason Kenney, by the way, was for years and years and years referred to as the leader of Canada's social conservative movement. Well, this leader of the social conservative movement later boasted about importing Iranian gays to Canada while he was federal minister of immigration, because that's something we have a shortage of in Canada, is Iranian gays. And his party was reduced to begging to march in the gay pride parade in Edmonton. They were turned down, amusingly, because their commitment to the cause was not deemed to be strong enough or long-standing enough. And then we have this. This is from the Edmonton Journal. Layers of metal fencing were erected around the perimeter of Grace Life Church in Parkland County Wednesday, that is just west of Edmonton, the provincial capital, as Alberta Health Services shuttered the building after months of defiance of provincial public health orders. Residents who live in the area said they saw about a dozen RCMP vehicles arrive at the church west of Edmonton in a convoy around 6 a.m. RCMP said officers were on the site to assist Alberta Health with the closure. A private security company was also on the property. By 8 a.m., a layer of fencing adorned with black cloth had been placed around the perimeter of the building. I thought the walls didn't work. I thought we were all agreed on that. By noon, the driveway into the church and the parking lot had also been blocked by a fencing company. Close to 50 people showed up to support the church throughout the morning, while several others drove by shouting support for the RCMP and the closure of the building. AHS issued a statement Wednesday announcing it had physically closed Grace Life Church and prevented access to the building. It said the closure will remain in effect until Grace Life can demonstrate an ability to comply with public health restrictions. The church's shuttering came after it held 2 packed services over Easter weekend in violation of a closure order issued in January for previously flouting COVID-19 restrictions. Pastor James Coates, who has led several services in recent months, was ticketed in December and then jailed in February for 35 days after refusing to follow court orders. In a statement, AHS listed several steps taken prior to the physical closure, including an order issued December 17th requiring Grace Life to comply with restrictions issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dina Hinshaw. A Court of Queen's Bench order obtained January 21st required Grace Life to comply with the previous order. So under super social conservative Jason Kenney, the Alberta health bureaucracy is imprisoning a pastor and now physically closing his church. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which has been representing Coates in court, said in his statement it is outraged by the Alberta government's decision to enter a private church and put up a double barrier around its exterior. Freedom of conscience and religion is the first fundamental freedom listed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is listed first because it is one of the key bedrock principles on which Canada is built, said John Carpe, JCCF president, in an email. The government has so far refused to justify the limits on worship and gathering. Churches are allowed to open at 15% of fire code capacity as long as masks are worn, and people from different households stay 2 meters apart. Grace Life has been found in violation of each of these restrictions. I knew John Carpe back in the day, and he was a friend of Jason Kenney's, as I was. I wonder what Carpe thinks about Jason Kenney sicking Alberta Health on an evangelical church. I know the media is quite thrilled about this. Quite thrilled. And Rachel Notley, who demanded the closure of the church, has got what she wanted. So, I was thinking, oh, yes, someone called Van Life 17 responded to me. No one is taking away the right to prayer. Why is a building exempt from public health regulations during the outbreak of a virus that is causing sickness and death? Yes, COVID-19 apparently is the only virus anywhere in the world that is causing sickness and death. Can you not still pray at home? Many other churches around the country and world are following these rules. I responded to this person, why do we need public buildings at all? Human contact is disgusting and dangerous. It spreads viruses. Why don't we just upload our brains to the cloud? Then we won't need bodies. Jason Kenney tweeted yesterday, we are taking strong action to stop the third wave from threatening our health system. Yes, again, the health system doesn't exist to, protect us. No, it's the other way around. And the health of thousands of Albertans. The rapid rise in cases, especially variants of concern, make this a critical time to stop the spread. I responded to the Premier, just heard about your health goons seizing Grace Life Church. What's next? Are you going to rewrite the Lord's Prayer to make it more pandemic appropriate? Our COVID, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy lockdown come, thy will be done in Edmonton as it is done in China. And yes, average age of death from COVID-19 in the province of Alberta is 81. And yet the media would have you to believe that people, in their 30s, 20s, teens are being struck down and are being loaded against walls like firewood. No. Fan Life 17 responded to me, you didn't answer my question, but instead gave a completely nonsensical and ridiculous reply. I responded, lockdowns are nonsensical, ridiculous, and unprecedented. Also, they don't work. How many times do you and your ilk have to bash our heads against the wall before you understand that? I got a response from someone who subsequently blocked me saying that he owns an essential business in Alberta, which has had to deal with these lockdowns. And what have you done over the last year? Ooh, essential. Actually, one of the chosen ones. Yeah, well, what I've done with my past life the last year is to avoid tin pot dictators like you. Insanity is a communicable disease. Someone called Leanna Bell tweeted in response, when the COVID is over is starting to sound just like when the Leafs win the Stanley Cup. If you're a Canadian or a hockey fan, you will understand that reference. But a lot of people screaming about, these nasty Christians. And apparently, Jason Kenney, well, he's still not gone far enough. And he's listening to Republicans, American Republicans, instead of his own health officials. Oh, dear, because we know that after Florida and Texas completely eliminated their restrictions, again, people were just keeling over in the streets in the thousands. No, wait, that didn't happen. Phil Johnson tweeted, question for those who claim to be evangelicals but have been cheerleading government efforts to close Grace Life Church. Has it risen to the level of tyranny yet? Do you still deny that this congregation is being persecuted? And again, video of Janice Irwin. Oh, yes, a former teacher. Yes, and a curriculum official with the Ministry of Education. Big surprise there. Yes, Teachers Union, head of the Teachers Union in the United States had something really strange to say, which I will get to later. But Before I do that, let's take a look at the chat. Our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson, thank you for your service. As the pastor was on the Ralph Retort last night. Hello to Anrun, who says, hi, Kevin. Goes nuts. What was Canada before today? Well, perhaps I should have said goes crazier. Hello to Don from Beyond, a Tricky Who, Palpcasso 88, Head McNeck. Going to relax horizontal on this park picnic table for this one, says Head McNeck. But he says, Kevin, I'm thinking of having a T-shirt made that says ho ho, very satirical. I must admit that, well, they say the great ones don't borrow, they steal, right? That line is an old one from Private Eye magazine in the 1960s. Hello to Buddy and Vienna Chronist, who says, Guten Abend. Corona ist ein großer Schwindel. I think you can figure out what that means. Chogokin 666 says, nuclear double mutant strain. Adam says, how about biological holocaust? No, dial that down a notch to Fukushima. Vienna Chronist says, when the threshold of destruction and debt is reached, that they can implement their great reset, only then will they stop. Glib Medley says, if this were a real pandemic, instead of billboards with mask propaganda, there would be billboards telling the masses to lose weight and pictograms of foods high in vitamin D and zinc. Also, you can get vitamin D from the sun. Yes, I know that Bill Gates believes the sun to be man's eternal enemy, but he's wrong about that, actually. The sun is our friend. It is the source of all life on Earth. What else do we have here? The leaders of the West have gone completely mad, says Steve. Polygon says the leaders of the West hate those they govern and want to punish them. Random number generator says, imagine being the kind of person who still takes COVID seriously. Well, the whole world is looking what's happening in Florida and in Texas and in Alabama and other states. They're looking at it. We've been told that we have to have lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, or else the world is going to come to an end. So after the restrictions were eliminated in Texas, Anthony Fauci, the sainted one, said deaths were going to go like this. No, instead they went like that. How about that? Money, people and money are going to flow from the lockdown states in the United States to the states that have not locked down. And a lot of these people are not going to come back. Brandon Smith says, Fukushima. Polygon says, dog brain, corporate slaves. Enough of the flu. Let's talk about the Floyd case. Perhaps I will get to that a little later. Glib Medley says the liquor stores will close when the Chauvin verdict is imminent. Jogakin 666 says, should I start drinking? Press 1 for yes. This reminds me of one of the stupidest things that I've ever seen in a movie, certainly a prestige movie. The movie Magnolia, was it Paul Thomas Anderson? Is that his name? Some wag called it 6 Actors in Search of an Oscar. Okay, so near the end of this movie, there is a literal plague of frogs in Los Angeles. That is to say, dead frogs falling from the skies, a multitude of them. And everyone goes about their life as if nothing had happened. Ooh, disgusting green mess on the road. If there were a literal plague of frogs in Los Angeles or anywhere else, you would have lineups, miles-long lineups for the liquor stores. And when people got into the liquor store, they would turn to a clerk and say, this is all my money. How much whiskey does this buy? Cecil Henry says 450 ICU beds in a province of 14 million, and we need a lockdown. Not just absurd, but gross failure to plan and malevolent after the fact. Random number generator says, should I take fentanyl? Press N in the chat. Oh, see, should I stay or should I go? Press 1 either way. Again, from Cecil Henry, it despise the government and bureaucracy of this country so much when they're not treasonous, they're parasites. Ethics are done in Canada. Done. Vienna Chronist again. In Austria, 9 million, there are 2,500 ICU. Of these, 500 apparently occupied by corona patients. Nevertheless, we are told of a medical emergency and should stay at home. Cecil Henry says, Kenny is social conservative. He's full anti-white and imported as much of the non-white world as possible when immigration minister, another treasonous criminal who would and has sold you out. Well, yes. Jason Kenney believes, and he's stated this in the past, that immigrants are better than Canadians. When he was immigration minister, he met with some immigrant who owned some Subway stores in Calgary, I believe, and was raving about this man who said, I can't hire Canadians because they refuse to work. An obvious lie. Kenny believes honestly that all of these immigrants, that they are all tremendous entrepreneurs. They're also smart and hardworking and Christian too. He actually believes this, although he was nicknamed Curry in a Hurry for his pandering to every ethnic minority in Canada, including Canada's Nepalese community. Pretty formidable electoral bloc, that one. Kenny is really, he's about the magic dirt. That people come to Canada and they're just transformed because they're interested in what? Economic freedom or some such? Yeah, speaking of that. Oh, Kenny, the big defender of the free market, of capitalism. Oh, so your government, the government of which you are head and practically dictator, that's how it works in Canada, has decided which businesses are essential and which are non-essential. Isn't the free market supposed to decide which businesses are essential and which businesses are non-essential? That's how I always understood it. Ed McNeck says there were live frogs falling. It was the sudden stop that made them dead. Yes, the old elevator joke. MF Superstar says Pelosi said dreamer illegals are morally equivalent to the founders. Yes, this is a Canadian myth, particularly noxious one, which has been propagated by Andrew Coyne and other unpleasant people. But the Canada that existed before the Charter of Rights, we don't want to talk about that. Charter of Rights came into effect in 1982 because the bad Canada, Supreme Court wasn't in charge. Of course, under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it has been ruled that, for instance, truth is not a defense to accusations of hate speech. I'll repeat that. In Canada, according to a ruling from our Supreme Court of Canada, truth is not a defense to accusations of hate speech. Also, you can't get away with so-called hate speech with regard to alphabet people if you are quoting from the Bible. Yes, that's true. And our Supreme Court has also ruled that school board decisions, which would tend to inhibit the dissemination of pause in schools, are illicit, they are illegal, they are unconstitutional if, for instance, local council members or school board members who vote for them, for instance, not making available Heather Has Two Mommies, and this was actually part of the case, such decisions are illegal if the people who vote for these restrictions on curricula could be said to be motivated by religious belief. Palpcasso88 says, is Kenny gay? It's a question many people have asked. When Stephen Harper was prime minister, there was talk about a gay mafia in the conservative government. I mean, we could talk about John Baird, but apparently that's, irrelevant. I wrote a piece about Kenny some years ago for VDare, and Peter Brimelow asked me, are you saying that Kenny is homosexual? And I said, well, I'm not. I'm not so sure anymore. I'm really not so sure anymore about that. Now, I know that Kenny he's never shown any interest in women whatsoever. That doesn't mean he's homosexual. When I say he's never shown any interest in women, that he could be shy, right? I've been to meals and such like many times with Jason Kenny, been in a room with him many times, and it's rather typical that, when an attractive woman walks across the room, you get the swivel neck effect from men, right? Never saw anything like that from Jason Kenny. Let's see. We're talking about Bob Grant being Italian again. Okay. What are we going to? Oh God! It just never stops. The torture never stops. I've talked before about how COVID-19 could be barely classified as a minor nuisance on Vancouver Island, a rather large island where I live. But we have the same lockdown rules as the rest of the province. And Bonnie Henry, who had been designated a living saint in my province, is now the wokesters, the panic porn merchants. They hate her now because she did not lock down fast enough. She did not institute a mask mandate fast enough. She is not locking down hard enough. Well, I don't know. Maybe members of the media and all these people, again, if it's a stay-at-home order, let's make it a stay-at-home order. Do these people have any real reason to leave the house? Premier Horgan of British Columbia got into some bother after he announced the latest lockdown in my province. And he was called Premier Dad because he said that people between the ages of 20 and 39 were not doing their bit, in the war against COVID. I don't know, was this anecdotal in some ways? He looked out the window one day from the Parliament building and saw too many people between the age of 20, or he assumed that they were between the age of 20 to 39, and they were not looking miserable. Could that be it? Could that be it? Perhaps. But he has discovered that people are coming from the mainland to Vancouver Island, again, where I live. And he is not happy about this at all. To give you an idea of just how power crazed our leaders are, there's a story from CBC News today. BC Ferries added extra sailings over the Easter long weekend. Oh dear, oh dear. Premier John Horgan has no plans to impose travel restrictions between Vancouver Island and the BC mainland, despite warnings that a recent spike of COVID-19 infections is at least partly the result of travel. Horgan said in an interview with On the Island, it's absolutely outrageous that some people are traveling to Vancouver Island for vacations. But what do we do? Arrest them? I don't know. It's early days yet. The Premier acknowledged the province could restrict ferry travel and has done so in the past, but he said it was not necessarily to good effect. I appreciate we want to be like New Zealand, but we can't be. So he's rejecting zero COVID for now, which is good, because zero COVID means entropy. It means the shuttering of society and the destruction of the economy. But the media, the Canadian media, is all on board for zero COVID. Horgan ruled out travel restrictions a day after provincial health officer Dr. Bonnie Henry told reporters unnecessary travel and social gatherings are fueling the fire for variants of concern. Ooh, that's right, pretty like, as Peter Sellers would have said in Lolita, fueling the fire for variants of concern. Username available. Last time I checked, 23 people had died of COVID in 15 months. 23 people on Vancouver Island, which has about 800,000 people. But last time I looked, there was one person in intensive care ward because of COVID-19. But we're not allowed to eat indoors. And it is by no means warm on Vancouver Island. Facebook, of course, is one of those social media institutions that knows all. It is one of the arbiters of truth. This is from WorldNet Daily. Facebook, which routinely adds its editorial comments to posts with which it disagrees, recently fact-checked a woman's complaint about her reaction to a coronavirus vaccine. Desiree Penrod, 25, said on Facebook after getting vaccinated in early March, "The vaccine is killing me today. My arm hurts beyond exhausted, headache, stomach cramps, and earaches." Penrod also posted, "Multiple people told me that I looked pale today. Yesterday I was fine, but today it's taking its toll on me." Facebook, citing the World Health Organization, added a disclaimer to a post by Penrose. "COVID-19 vaccines go through many tests for safety and effectiveness before they're approved," and communication. A week later, Penrod died. Her obituary said she passed away unexpectedly. Facebook's editorial comment, citing the World Health Organization, provided a link to the international organization whose investigation into the origin of COVID-19 has been criticized because of China's control of it. Reporter at Aidan Salazar at InfoWars noted previous posts by Penrod appeared to show she was experiencing seizures prior to vaccination and was likely not a good candidate to receive the vaccine due to her medical issues. But apparently in Detroit, they're going, what, the Army, something like that, is going house to house, compelling people? Let's go back to that story. Detroit, okay, here we go. Let's open that up. This is from radio station WWJ. Detroit will send workers door to door to urge residents to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, urge, that's not quite compel. The city of Detroit still struggling with the coronavirus, plans to send workers door to door to encourage residents to get the vaccine. Detroit City Council has approved a $1.2 million contract with Detroit Employment Solutions to hire over 50 people. Officials will also work with nonprofits similar to the door-to-door effort for the census. Detroit Mayor Duggan's executive assistant, Vicky Kovari, said this is an all-out effort to battle COVID-19 in the city. "We're hoping to get started by the end of April," she said. "In the first stage of this canvassing, we will knock on every residential door in the city of Detroit, approximately 220,000. Yeah, okay. I'm not seeing the word compel. Maybe that was just, Matt Drudge's wishful fantasy, because he has gone completely nuts over COVID-19. You know, when you... Fukushima. My God, we're all gonna die. The World Economic Forum, which believes that in 2030, people will own no property. They will have no privacy. Oh, wait for it. Those are good things, according to WEF. So, of course, they're an authoritative source. They are, of course, behind the Great Reset of Build Back Better fame, which is, it exists, but it's also conspiracy. We got the Schrodinger's cat thing going on here. If you think that people are exploiting the Great Reset because they're unwoke or nasty people, then it doesn't exist. If you were in favor of the Great Reset and Build Back Better because it's a chance to introduce, global equity and also, the end of political and personal liberty and things like that, then it's a good thing. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The WEF is promoting a smart mask that tracks your breathing and alerts you via an app if you wear it improperly or forget to wear it at all. Yes, really. A video clip posted to the WEF's official Twitter account this morning hypes the mask of the future, designed by Chinese firm Circu Technologies. The smart masks tells you when to wash it, whether you're wearing it properly, and alerts you via a sensor linked to a cell phone app when you've left it alone. How many people wearing this mask are going to be found stabbing their faces or choking themselves trying to get it off because the mask won't shut up and stop lecturing them what to do? The environmental benefits of the mask are also touted, as it would cut down on the number of disposable face masks that end up in landfills. The fact that the mask can keep track of whether or not you're wearing it led some respondents to suggest that it could eventually be tied to a Chinese communist-style social credit score system. A reply deboosted Corn Dog tweeted, "Mask hooked up to your smartphone so the data can instantly update your social credit score." In China, the state has already linked its coronavirus tracking system to its social credit score program, dishing out punishments for those who fail to mask up or violate social distancing rules. Another Twitter user noted how the promo video inadvertently admits that carbon dioxide is a significant health threat posed by too much mask wearing. This is the first time that I've ever seen this admitted. That, I don't know, introductory science, biology, bad air out, good air in. And the bad air, of course, is carbon dioxide, which masks trap so that you're breathing in carbon dioxide, which is why people, including myself, after they are compelled to wear masks, they start to feel a little dizzy. Brexit Wolf tweeted another weird, creepy video about the dystopian future the World Economic Forum desires, but this one at least admits that masks are potentially dangerous. Too much CO2 builds up behind them. What are the likely effects of this? Particularly on children, I would say. Any research into that? Has there been any research into the health effects of these masks becoming disease vectors because they are frequently reworn and reworn, stuffed in pockets, laid all over the place where they can be covered in, dust or goo of various kinds, all of the biological goo that gets into the mask from you breathing out of it, particularly, if you're in a situation which I found myself in, that last time I was on a BC ferry, that, you don't have to wear the mask when you're eating, but when you're not eating or drinking, you have to wear the mask. So it was take the mask down, take a bite of the sandwich, chew it, put the mask on, swallow it, mask down. It's just all so tiresome. And speaking of which, well, actually, we have some good news here. William Briggs, at his excellent website, wmbriggs.com, writes today, White House backing down on vaccine passports, beginning of the end of the panic. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Tuesday ruled out the Biden administration playing any role in a vaccine passport system, as Republican governors in particular balk at the concept. Yes, the Biden administration had previously said, no. There's not going to be any national vaccine passport. That will be done by private business. The government will merely set out the parameters. And a friend of mine last night, as we were sitting outside shivering because one cannot eat indoors any longer, pointed out this is pretty much the textbook definition of corporatism, i.e. fascism. So Psaki said, our interest is very simple from the federal government, which is America's privacy and rights should be protected so that these systems are not used against people unfairly. The government is not now, nor will we be supporting a system that requires Americans to carry a credential. Briggs comments, that's it, it's over, a rare victory for reality. Governors DeSantis, Abbott, and some others, Missouri, wrote executive orders banning vaccine passports. Florida plus Texas already was too much for the oligarchs to buck against. The others coming along made it impossible. You can't ask for papers on one side of the border and not on the other, and vice versa. The people in the blue terror states would soon become too uppity and refuse to play along. What do you do with foreigners who are just visiting and haven't any papers? Even if you can, how do you check? Vaccine status would have to be just as rigorously tracked as citizenship. They could have still got away with it on travel, maybe, since our last panic, war on terror, gave us Homeland Security, which nationalized all the airport securities. Don't forget the mandate useless masks on flights because of our current panic. But the pushback was too much for them for now anyway. I doubt it was citizen complaints that did this. Those might have influenced Abbott and DeSantis and others, sure, but the oligarchs don't give a damn about citizens. Sure, if vaccine passports went into effect, there'd be a terrible short show of folks saying they're not playing along. But what about when they found out that they couldn't get a flight to Disneyland or Disney World? The Hill also said the World Health Organization on Tuesday cautioned that the use of vaccine passports may not be an effective way to reopen global travel, citing the lack of vaccinations in certain pockets of the world. The whole system would have been too unwieldy this time. Watch for it in the future. This could be the beginning of the end of the panic. I had hoped it would be when Abbott opened Texas, but you recall the howl from the evil media saying it was the end of the world. They weren't ready to let go since they had done so well in the panic they helped create, but it can't last forever. See if you can discover the media's level of hysteria and leave headlines in the comments. This will be a tremendous blow to Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, and IBM, who are all set to profit. Watch for their spokespeople to react to. He had written yesterday, earlier I said 2020 was the year experts pretended to forget all they knew about viruses. I have to correct. I now say 2020 and 2021 are the years experts pretended to forget all they knew about viruses. And there is a chart. Ontario, Canada, influenza A and B, 2013 through 2017. And we're looking at winter peaks. And it goes like this. It goes like this. Consistently. Because that's how respiratory diseases works. What's that, Washington Post? Do you have something to say about masks? Here's a story by Eliza McGraw. The Washington Post, April 2nd, 2020. Everyone wore masks during the 1918 flu pandemic. They were useless. Briggs comments, a good thing you said it before you knew Trump was against masks. Britain's bright boy Boris Johnson, a man reduced to a blubbering mess by his illness, suggests creating what amounts to a one-world government dedicated to finding him a comb. To solving future pandemics. He and a fine group of other rulers signed an open letter about this. After hinting about a rather important war nobody wants to mention by name, Boris said we must come together to dispel the temptations of isolationism and nationalism. But no dispelling nationalism for Jews, Asians, blacks, and of course, but for Europeans. Nobody is safe. The whole world has to get together. So Boris Johnson, having been forced, compelled, pushed, shoved into finally getting Britain out of the European Union, is now apparently supporting efforts for Britain to be part of a one world government. Oh, you say I'm exaggerating. No, just this one world government would be in charge of health for the entire world and would be able to determine where people would be allowed to go and under what circumstances, masks, social distancing, whatever. That's a dictatorship on a very basic level. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. You know, I've been following this with regard to a conservative government of the United Kingdom, or I guess more specifically, England, because they do their own things in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But Boris says one thing and then says another, and then says, no, we're going to go back to what I originally said. No, actually, we're going to do the other thing. This is, the man has lost his bottle, as they say in England. He is, completely terrified over this. Britain will achieve herd immunity on Monday, according to a Telegraph exclusive. The number of people with protection, either through vaccination or previous infection, will hit 73.4% on April 12th, the herd immunity threshold. That's good news, right? That means the panic, the hysteria is over, doesn't it? Well, it should. A stop press at the end of the story. There's a very encouraging note about the government's unhappiness with the models SPIM is relying on for the latest advice. It's feeding the government via SAGE. Interestingly, almost all the points the government has raised are points raised by Glenn Bishop and others on lockdown skeptics. The Telegraph understands that the government is unhappy with the pessimistic tone set by models produced by SPIM, released earlier this week, and has asked other groups to critique the work. The SPIM summary presented to SAGE suggested the roadmap out of the lockdown was highly likely to lead to increased hospital cases and deaths this summer. But is it highly likely to lead to Fukushima? Professor Carl Hennigan, director of the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, said, quote, "In my 20 plus years as a doctor, I've never come across a summer surge in a respiratory infection in the UK. The modeling now keeps changing dramatically, so it's hard to see how it helps us. What we really want to do is to look at the real world data and make decisions from there." I was thinking last night that these people who are screaming in horror, oh no, Alberta hasn't gone far enough. Doug Ford hasn't gone far enough. They have blood on their hands. What I'd want to say to them is this. Why don't we just start from a known truth, a universally known truth, that everyone on Earth will one day die? And then we can start looking at the relative risks and benefits of certain behaviors and move on from there. But then I realized that this is conceptually, this is far too difficult for the vast majority of people to understand, and certainly for 95% of the media to understand. We read stories about people in the media, using drugs, say. Well, we know that drugs have a risk, right? I mean, people die from using drugs. And many of them, impact health profoundly over time. But they've decided to take the risk nonetheless. So my final word on this will come from Alex Berenson, as usual. I know I perhaps strained your patience, spending close to an hour on this subject. But again, I woke up this morning and I had thought that the idiocy in my country could not get worse, and it has significantly. Okay. I'm not sure Americans get how big a deal the AstraZeneca vaccine crisis is because it isn't sold here. It was supposed to be the vaccine non-wealthy countries could use. And the regulators had better explain how these results aren't generalizable. Yes, AstraZeneca faces more setbacks in Britain and the EU. European regulators found a possible link to the clots. Since both vaccines work very similarly, I think the mRNA vaccine should be scrutinized too, as thrombocytopenia looks like a real risk. But if the British regulators are correct, the specific issue that has caused so much concern for AZN is much less frequent with those two. I've been thinking about these mRNA vaccines, which are not vaccines as generally understood, which modify your body at a genetic level. What will be the consequences of this? A year, 5 years, 10 years? from this. This is experimental. And I have no intention of taking mRNA. In no way am I saying that other people shouldn't. It just I'm not gonna do it. I mean, I might well be forced to do it, but I'm just not pleased with the idea of being turned into a guinea pig, or of tens of millions of people being turned into guinea pigs. I mean, this mRNA stuff, it really sounds like, something out of a scientific dystopian novel, or perhaps like the thalidomide crisis, which you could look up. Jake Tapper tweets, lost amid all the criticism of Major League Baseball for moving the All-Star game from Georgia to protest that state's new voting law are some simple facts about what have likely had happened had MLB not done so. An informed source tells CNN. Essentially what Tapper is saying, that there would have been all these boycotts of baseball players from the All-Star game. Yes, and so what? Berenson responds, so I guess CNN will be leaving Georgia too. Let's go to the chat before we move on to, the Ukraine. Or out of the omen, mark of the beast. Neil Terry says, yeah, not really interested in being a lab rat. DeBarea says, mental illness at highest levels. Brent Studemeyer says, currently drinking a nice tall glass of Soylent while reading the Washington Post and enjoying a quiet night in with my wife and her transgender son. Bob Paxson says, college messes up women in their 20s. Yeah, interesting debate, chicken egg debate. We know that liberal women have significantly higher rates of mental illness than non-liberal women. And the question is, are these women mentally ill because they're liberal, or are they liberal because they're mentally ill? Apropos of nothing, says Adam, any Guided by Voices fans here? I'm not really all that well familiar with them. And greatest line in Team America World Police, I will never die. Yeah, Peter Simple, who I mentioned several times on this live stream, he once fantasized about the existence, several times fantasized about the existence of something called the Church of Jesus Christ, the non-smoker, certain radical adherents of which believe that those who have never smoked will never die. And I was thinking we've pretty much reached a point in somewhere between 30 to 50% of the population in Canada, certainly in Canada, might be lower in the United States, of the Church of Jesus Christ, the Eternal Maskers, certain radical adherents of which believe that people who are always masked will never die. David Wright, C-Man just posted on Gab responding to a fan of KMG that Kevin is responsible for him starting his own podcast. I interviewed him on my old podcast, the one that I shared with Kevin Steele. And after that point, he decided to start his own podcast. And then it was reported to me that, I don't know, he'd said something dismissive of me. I don't know exactly what that was. MF Superstar says, hypermodernism created in people a psychological need for worldwide collective crisis experience with rules, everyone in the world following together to save lives, etc. Well, I'll say it again. Why don't we ban cars from driving faster than, say, 70 miles an hour? I mean, I see a lot of car commercials where, it's implied that this car can go, 120, 150 miles an hour. How is that possibly necessary? Maximum speed limits of 70 miles per hour. Why do cars need to go faster than that? In fact, if we cut the speed limit down to 30 miles an hour, tens of thousands of lives would be saved every year. And also, lesser but still significant injuries. We could do that. Why don't we force everyone in a car, driving a car, or passenger in a car to wear a crash helmet? Why don't we do that? We could, and it would save lives. I'm not trying to give people any ideas here. I'm just saying that these are questions which have been considered, and they have been rejected. Eke Lux live stream says, hello, not seen you for a while. No to the Gene Gab, no to the COVID pass, just say no. Random number generator says, I walked into a place and after about 2 minutes realized I'd completely forgot to put in the mask. As far as I know, no one even looked at me funny. Well, it was funny. The current rule in restaurants in British Columbia, or eating establishments of any kind, you got to sit outside now. And when you are walking to your table, or when you are walking to the washroom or back, you have to wear the mask. But when you are sitting at your table, you do not need to wear the mask. So there I was sitting at a table for about an hour and not wearing a mask. And then when I left, there was a gate. When I left, I put my mask on, and it was just like muscle memory, just the experience of, when I leave this hotel, when I go into the hall to leave this hotel, I put the mask on because it's mandatory, and then I walk down the stairs and then through the lobby. When I go through the front door, I take the mask off. Again, when I return to the hotel, I put the mask on, and so when I left the restaurant last night, not wearing a mask, I put the mask on, which, I don't know, it's pretty funny. I have found myself leaving a place where a mask is required. Well, it's required everywhere. And then I find that I've walked 2 or 3 blocks down the street and I'm still wearing the mask. And it absolutely infuriates me. I believe they call this operant conditioning. Brandon Smith says future healthscape is shaping up nicely. Well, when the economic crash happens, this is going to be used as an excuse for even more control. Oh, people aren't allowed to talk about politics anymore, at least people on the right, because we are in an economic crisis. Previously, we were in a health crisis, but now it's an economic crisis. I think Kunstler is right that the future, and the near future, we'll see governments claiming more and more power, but effectively having less and less power, essentially increasingly being ignored. I mean, if the government says that it is going to control every aspect of our lives, that's a hard one to pull off unless you start shooting people or throwing them into gulags. Goose says, I have the opposite muscle memory. I always forget and end up taking the mask off in the few situations where I even wear it. People are talking about the Ukraine again. And one of those people is Ron Paul. And he has a piece at his Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Why is Biden administration pushing Ukraine to attack Russia? On March 24th, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky signed what was essentially a declaration of war on Russia. In the document, titled Presidential Decree Number 117, the U.S.-backed Ukrainian leader declared that it is the official policy of Ukraine to take back Crimea from Russia. The declaration that Ukraine would take back Crimea from Russia also followed and was perhaps instigated by President Biden's inflammatory and foolish statement that Crimea is Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was the chief architect of the U.S.-backed coup against Ukraine in 2014, continued egging on the Ukrainians, promising full U.S. support for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Oh, that is a very foolish guarantee to give. That is the guarantee that Neville Chamberlain of Britain and President of France gave Poland in 1939. And when Poland was invaded, first by Germany and then by the Soviet Union, of course, Britain and France realized they were in no position to do anything about it, which made them look weak. And countries that have made themselves weak put themselves into a dangerous situation. Many Americans, Ron Paul writes, wonder why they are not even half as concerned about the territorial integrity of the United States. Not to be outdone, at the beginning of this month, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who previously served on the board of missile maker Raytheon, called his counterpart in Ukraine and promised unwavering U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty. As the U.S. considers Crimea to be Ukrainian territory, this is clearly a green light for Kiev to take military action. Washington is also sending in weapons. Some 300 tons of new weapons have arrived in the past weeks, and more is on the way. As could be expected, Moscow has responded to Zelensky's decree and to the increasingly bellicose rhetoric in Kiev and Washington by repositioning troops and other military assets closer to its border with Ukraine. Does anyone doubt that if the U.S. were in the same position, for example, if China installed a hostile and aggressive government in Mexico, the Pentagon might move troops in a similar manner? But according to the media branch of the U.S. military-industrial congressional media complex, Russian troop movements are not a response to clear threats from a neighbor, but instead are just more Russian aggression. The unhinged U.S. experts behind the 2014 coup against the elected Ukrainian president are back in power, and they are determined to finish the job, even if it means World War III. The explicit U.S. backing of Ukraine's military ambitions in the region are a blank check to Kiev, but it is a check that Kiev would be wise to avoid cashing. And he's referring next to something I talked about yesterday. Back in 1956, the U.S. government pumped endless propaganda into Hungary, promising military backing for an uprising against its Soviet occupiers. When the Hungarians, believing Washington's lies, did rise up, they found themselves all alone and facing Soviet retaliation. Despite the cruel U.S. propaganda, at least Eisenhower was wise enough to realize that no one would benefit from a nuclear war over Budapest. Why is it any of our business whether Crimea is part of Ukraine or part of Russia? Why is it any of our business if the Russian-speaking population of eastern Ukraine prefer being aligned with Russia? Why, for that matter, are unproven allegations of Russian meddling in our elections a violation of the rules-based international order, but an actual U.S.-backed coup against an elected Ukrainian government is not? We are seeing foreign policy made by Raytheon, Ron Paul concludes, and the other U.S. military contractors through cutouts in government like Austin and the others. Feckless U.S. policy experts believe their own propaganda about Russia and are on the verge of taking us to war over it. It seems as if Americans are sleepwalking through this dangerous minefield. Let us hope they soon wake up before we are all blown up. The ringleader of the 2014 coup against the Ukraine was an American diplomat called Victoria Nuland. According to Wikipedia, she served as the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State and is the nominee to be Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. She held the rank of Career Ambassador, the highest diplomatic rank in the U.S. Foreign Service. She is the former CEO of the Center for New American Security. Sounds like a neocon outfit. Does it not? I see Robert Kaplan involved there. Oh, the Open Society Foundation, Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems, Airbus Group, the Boeing Company, Chevron Corporation, Lockheed Martin Corporation, Raytheon, among the top donors to this organization. Oh, Richard Armitage is involved. Michel Flournoy, one of the, when Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president in 2016, all the experts said that this faster pussycat kill woman was going to be Secretary of Defense. Thankfully, that did not happen. Victoria Nuland is married to a fellow called Robert Kagan, and he is the co-founder of the neoconservative Project for the New American Century. He is the neocon's neocon. I believe that Tucker Carlson had some amusing things to say about him, about his unpleasantness and stupidity. Yes, Carlson had a piece in the American Conservative. Why are these professional war peddlers still around? This would include Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, and Bill Kristol. Victoria Nuland engineered a situation whereby the Ukrainian government became a very strange coalition of Jewish oligarchs and neo-Nazi muscle. The Ukrainian people are not particularly interested in fighting for their corrupt country, which has a per capita annual income, average annual income, less than half of that of Belarus. Now, you might ask why a country so rich in natural resources, the famous black earth of the Ukraine and mineral resources, is so poor. That's because the government steals everything that isn't nailed down. And they give it to people like Hunter Biden. Yeah. The Ukraine is entirely dependent on foreign aid. It's a bankrupt country. And so the Ukraine is a puppet state. There is a solution to this difficulty. And Edward Luttwak pointed that out 7 years ago in the New Republic. The piece has a somewhat misleading headline: Russia wants much more than Crimea. And essentially what he is arguing, that it be divided, that the Ukraine be divided. The Novi Russia plan, prepared in the Kremlin, worked out in detail down to the design of its flag, would separate all the territory east of the Great Dnieper River into a new state affiliated with the Russian Federation until its accession can be worked out in due course. This Trans-Dnieper territory is many times larger than the Transnistria Republic that the Russians successfully sliced off the Moldovan Republic and keep to this day. But unlike the latter, which is separated from the Russian Federation by Ukrainian territory, Novi Russia would seamlessly form its southern extension down to the Black Sea. Putin could therefore, hang on, let me go back just a minute. Certainly the outlook of the populations living east of the Dnieper is very different from the outlook of the protagonists of the revolt. The activists from Lviv, that city being the Lvov of Galicia that was only annexed in 1944, many of whose inhabitants are Uniate Catholics rather than Orthodox. Putin could therefore appeal to the impeccably Wilsonian principle of self-determination to legitimize his new state. Finally, the Trans-Dnieper Novi Russia would still have Kiev as its capital in the 3 districts east of the Great River, allowing the Ukrainians their Lviv as their historic capital. Putin could even boast of his restraint in giving up Odessa, historically Russian, but west of the Dnieper. Very sensible solution, but there are no sensible solutions for people who are determined on war. And I don't know, war. Talk of war is everywhere. This is from the Epoch Times. Beijing, accelerating timeline for possible Taiwan invasion. Expert warns the Chinese Communist regime is accelerating its plans to invade Taiwan as Beijing ratchets up military maneuvers against the island. 20 Chinese military aircraft, including 4 nuclear-capable H-6K bombers, 10 J-16 fighter jets, 2 Y-8 anti-submarine warfare aircraft, and a KJ-500 airborne early warning system and control aircraft entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone on March 26th, according to Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense. It was the largest incursion ever reported by the ministry. The incursion was the most serious incident amid a significant increase in hostility by Beijing against Taiwan since 2020. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, re-elected last January, has taken a hard line against threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, while the island has deepened its cooperation with the United States, prompting the regime to escalate its warmongering toward the island. The CCP sees Taiwan as part of its territory and has threatened war to bring the island into the fold. The self-ruled island is a de facto independent country with its own democratically elected government, military, constitution, and currency. Last year, the Chinese Air Force flew about 380 sorties into Taiwan's ADIZ, the highest number in a given year since 1996. I don't know whether the West, or effectively the United States, would have the ability to stop mainland China from overrunning Taiwan. But I will say this. If China does decide to try and take the island, this would give us the opportunity. I think that it would be, demanded as a moral necessity that a cordon sanitaire be placed around communist China, that we break off relations with them, we stop trading with them, we send all their businessmen home, we send all their people home, and we get on with our lives. Beijing's incursions are part of a series of dry runs in preparation for an invasion of Taiwan. John Mills, former director of cybersecurity policy, strategy, and international affairs at the office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense, told the Epoch Times. Mills projects that these exercises could culminate in a large-scale dry run in the next 2 years. These dry runs are necessary, Mills said, given the complexity of amphibious landing operations, as well as the fact that the Chinese military has never conducted a forced landing on a hostile power in a real-life situation before. Any amphibious assault on Taiwan may also involve swarms of Chinese civilian merchant vessels and fishing boats, he said. He believes an invasion could come in the next 3 years, much sooner than the 6-year estimate given by U.S. Admiral Philip Davidson, head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, during a congressional hearing in early March. Mills said, if they haven't done it in 10 years, I think Xi Jinping will probably have been removed from office. I think even 6 years is pushing it. And here's a good news story. No, see, not all the world is the same, despite efforts, now again, by the U.S. government and woke capital to make it so. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A rainbow-colored statue in honor of Black Lives Matter that was erected in the Hungarian capital of Budapest was vandalized and then demolished within 24 hours. The monument was a recreation of the Statue of Liberty with the words Black Lives Matter inscribed on the tablet. The statue was meant to remain in place for 2 weeks until April 14th, but was immediately targeted after it was unveiled in Budapest's 9th district. Pro-family activists described the monument as an anti-European, anti-white, anti-heterosexual, and anti-Christian symbol, and within 24 hours it was attacked 3 separate times, doused with paint, and finally torn down. Police later arrested members of the Legion Hungaria organization for their role in defacing the monument. According to the monument's creator, Peter Shelley, its message was neutral. Quote, it's not a thing that speaks against either side. There's no claim in it that Black Lives Matters or that this is pro-homosexual, and there's no message that the BLM is bad, he told Daily News Hungary. It sounds like a bad translation to me. There are no plans to replace the statue. Black Lives Matter and its Antifa allies are famous for defacing and tearing down statues of great men who represent the civilization they are committed to destroying, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Christopher Columbus, and many more, writes Dave Blunt. In Hungary, BLM reaped as it has sown. An Alphabet People monument that was situated in the Polish capital of Warsaw also suffered a similar fate after it was erected in 2012, having been continually vandalized before being removed permanently in 2015. Hungary's populist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has cultivated support in the staunchly Christian country for his efforts to defend the sanctity of the family in the face of rampant progressivism in other European countries. Last December, Hungary passed a constitutional amendment affirming the right of children to identify with their birth gender and defining marriage as between a man and a woman. asserting that Europe's native population decline represented a sickness. Orban also oversaw a program to offer significant financial incentives for the country's own native citizens to have children, handing out 30,600 euro loans to married couples who have 3 or more children who are completely forgiven after the birth of their 3rd child. Nativism, they call it, or natalism, actually. Apparently, it is a bad thing. We don't need to make our own people anymore. We can import them from the third world. Now, this is a very strange story from the London Daily Star, which is really quite reminiscent of a novel by Piers Paul Reed, which I reviewed on the book club a couple of years ago, called On the Third Day, which I highly recommend. The Vatican has been digging a secret tunnel in Jerusalem in order to exhume King David's DNA and resurrect the Messiah, a rabbi has claimed. The Regavim movement, a group dedicated to the protection of Israel's national resources, filed a petition against the Jerusalem municipality last week, demanding they take action against the tunnel. It is claimed that there is a passage approximately 1,970 feet long and 5 feet wide under the Church of the Dormition on Mount Zion, on which construction was completed about 12 years ago. Regavim alleges Catholic authorities built the tunnel from the main building of the Dormition Abbey to the residences of the clergy in the Beit Yosef building. The group also says the passage was constructed without permission and may have damaged archaeological artifacts. But one spiritual leader is convinced that the purpose of the tunnel is far more sinister than simple transportation. Rabbi Daniel Assor of the Yenar Institute claims it was built to allow members of the Church of the Dormition to exhume the remains of King David, the king of Israel who killed the giant Goliath, who is believed to have been buried in Mount Zion. Assor also alleged that the church is acting on instructions from the Vatican, which says has a plan to connect DNA samples from King David's bones. The Vatican will then use his DNA to clone an entirely new human who they will attempt to fool the world into believing is the returned Messiah. One of the key differences between Catholicism and Judaism is a belief in the coming of the Messiah. Yes, well, all right. If Jesus Christ reappeared on earth, I think that Pope Francis would act rather like Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. And he wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. Let's get more from James Burnham on the subject of can politics be scientific? And this is from his book, in summation of his book, The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. The deficiencies, that is to say, the elite acting scientifically, can all be overcome in the case of sections of the elite. They are comparatively small in size. Their members can and do acquire a good deal of knowledge about administration and rules. We may add that at certain periods in certain societies, they have done so, acted scientifically, that is, or come close to it. What exactly would this mean for the rulers or for some other section of the elite to be scientific about political affairs? And if they were, would it be to the benefit of society as a whole? It would mean, as always when conduct is scientific, that the section in question would pursue consciously understood and deliberately chosen goals. The goals would have to be real and possible. From these conditions, it follows that the choice of alternative goals would be confined within very narrow limits. All utopias would be excluded, all those mirages of permanent and universal peace and plenty and joy. Moreover, since the general pattern of social development is determined by technological change and by other factors quite beyond the likelihood of human control, a scientific elite would have to accept that general pattern. It was an illusion in 1800 to think that society could revive the social structure appropriate to the pre-steam engine era. So today, it is an illusion to dream that the 19th century structure can be retained on the technological basis of the assembly line, the airplane, electricity, and radio. From this point of view, we may say that a scientific elite would have to be opportunist, not in the narrower sense in which opportunism means taking the easiest course today with no clear thought of tomorrow, but in the broader perspective of not trying to buck the mainstream of development not fighting for causes that are already lost when the battle begins. In short, a scientific ruling group would not guide its political actions by myths. We must, however, repeat that our concern is only with political actions. Just as a man thoroughly scientific in the field of physics can accept the most naive myths in the field of politics, so can another whose political actions are consistently scientific nevertheless believe all sorts of myths in other fields. We find a certain demonstration of this in the history of the Catholic Church. The upper hierarchy of the Church advocates and presumably believes very many non-scientific theories. However, since the time when St. Augustine made the wonderfully useful distinction between the city of God and the city of man, this has not prevented the hierarchy on frequent occasions, and sometimes for centuries together, from acting scientifically in the field of organization and politics. Yes, I'll just comment on that clearly when you have an elite, a scientific elite, which has effectively absorbed the political elite, when it carries on about a virus as if it is a sentient enemy, when it talks about a war on this virus and how sinister and insinuating it is, well, here we have a scientific elite which is given over completely to myth and not to science. This COVID-19 is not a moral question, but the entire scientific elite and the political elite wagging their fingers at people. You are not fighting hard enough. There's nothing scientific at all about that. Burnham we have seen that the primary real goal of every ruling group is the maintenance of its own power and privilege. Scientific conduct on the part of the group would not destroy this social fact, but on the contrary, would require the group to recognize it frankly and to take appropriate steps to ensure power and privilege. Would it not seem then that scientific rulers would be the worst of all, that a scientific ruling class would mean in practice an eternal tyranny? Pretty prescient, eh? Should the ruled not rather rejoice at every error, every illusion, every absurdity of the rulers? Under some circumstances, this would undoubtedly be the sensible attitude on the part of the ruled. Nevertheless, there is often a certain correlation between the interests of the ruler and the ruled, in spite of the fact that the primary goal of the rulers is to serve their own interest. Examples are not at all hard to find. Everyone will doubtless admit that James C. Petrillo runs the Musicians' Union first and all to his own benefit. And if the published reports of his salary and other perquisites of office are correct, he does very well by himself. However, it is also plain enough that his regime has greatly improved the economic lot of the musician members of the Union. During the 5th century in Athens or in the Roman Empire, the ruled and the rulers flourished together and together met disaster. And this so often happens. The fate of an entire society is frequently, whether one likes it or not, or as unjust as it may seem usually to be, bound up with the fate of its ruling class. The collapse of the French ruling class a few years ago, remember this book was published in 1943, meant a harsh tragedy for the entire French people, blameless as the French masses might properly be considered from a moral standpoint. Surely it would have been better for the French people if they'd been ruled by an elite which knew its business, knew, among other things, how to keep itself in social power, and which was firm enough to take the necessary steps to do so. If the generals are no good, the army will be defeated. But the soldiers also, in fact, primarily, will be the ones who are slaughtered. A society, a city, or a nation, or an empire may become as a whole so thoroughly rotten that it is better that it should be destroyed as a social organism. But this too is seldom fortunate for the individual members of the society, ruled as well as rulers. Yes, and there's a paradox there. You know, you've heard of accelerationism, that our system is so corrupt, so crazy, that we should look to speed up that process. Well, I'm not so sure about that, because the results would be very, very ugly indeed. And I'm sure there's some people, you know, who have their cabins in the woods and they've got all their supplies and they've got their guns and ammunition and think that it's going to work out well for them, that they'll be on top. Again, I'm not so sure about that either. Burnham continues, the lessons of history show that a ruling class can seldom continue long in power unless it is prepared to open its ranks to able and ambitious newcomers from below. A scientific ruling class will therefore keep its ranks open, and this will also be to the benefit of the ruled, both in providing an outlet for dynamic individuals and even more through permitting a greater expansion of creative social energies. Political liberty, too, in the long run, usually aids both rulers and ruled. We have already seen that this is so from the point of view of the ruled. From the side of the rulers, liberty is a safeguard against bureaucratic degeneration, a check on errors, and a protection against revolution. Well, we see that our elites everywhere in the West have decided they know better than Machiavelli and James Burnham. They have hegemony. They are not prepared to tolerate opposition, and within the elite, it is becoming a hereditary oligarchy. The public schools have been ruined quite deliberately in order to prevent a competition, and we have things like internships to keep bright members of the non-elite from entering the elite. You chose your parents poorly, so we can't let you become part of the elite. Burnham continues, if a considerable section of the elite proceeded more or less scientifically, catastrophic revolutions would be much less likely. It may not so be immediately clear that the elimination of revolutions would promote the welfare of society as a whole. The net result of at least some revolutions would seem to be to the benefit of the masses, at least when measured against the old regimes. However, the point is that a scientific ruling class could avoid catastrophic revolution, not by stopping revolutionary change in society, but only by guiding the change, controlling it, and thus bringing it about in a more orderly manner. Catastrophic revolutions occur when the conditions that require a drastic change in the social structure are present, but the changes themselves are blocked. Then, sooner or later, they burst out in full eruption. There is seldom anything inevitable about this process. The broad changes will take place in any event. If they can be carried through without the immeasurable blood and terror and brutality and chaos, which are the sure accompaniments of modern mass revolutions, there are few who would be losers. But revolutions will nonetheless certainly come if their causes are not removed, and only a responsible leadership, understanding the laws of society and acting on that understanding, ready to sacrifice, as it would have to sacrifice many of its own immediate interests, and blessed, moreover, with not a little luck besides, would have a chance of removing those causes. Well, the paragraph that I've just read chills my blood, because we can see that everywhere in the West, we see that our elites are acting as if they are looking to foment a revolution. And if I had to guess where in the West we would first get a revolution, I would guess Britain. I would guess Britain. Particularly, you see, Scotland's demanding independence again. What about England? When does England get its independence? Why is England forced to pay for the grandeurs and the follies of Scotland? Why is England forced to pay for Northern Ireland, which gets about 3/4 of its revenues from London? Why is England devolved into a narco tyranny? The government is waging war on COVID-19. Is it? Well, it's waging war on its own people. Even as, we're too busy dealing with mean tweets to deal with a knife crime and organized racial rape on our streets. It's rotten through and through. And I shall return to Burnham tomorrow. And let us go back to the chat. I think I'm going to start learning Russian, says Goose. Okay, Andrew Anglin. I don't want to talk about that fellow. Really do not want to talk about that fellow. Polygon says the true black pill is that all Western governments and their elite counterparts have taken the blue pill. They all believe in bio-Leninist, shit-lib woke narrative. They are all true believers. Okay. Yeah, Goose is an accelerationist. I see. Oh, please, let's not name Nazi publications in the chat. Polygon says, imagine destroying the last vestiges of liberty that remained in the West because of the flu. Laughed my ass off. We deserve to go quietly into the night. That's not normally how it happens, though. It's rather noisy and bloody and brutal, as Burnham points out. People talk about, oh, the Chinese taking over. Oh, they're furious with us already. I don't think that they would be very kind should they take over. Okay. Matthew Gubbin says China is too authoritarian. Western elites want what George Grant referred to as the therapeutic state. Brave New World, not 1984. Yeah, there's a problem there. And the government has to produce the Gibbs. Patriotism in my own country has been completely hollowed out. And okay, well, you don't need patriotism anymore. Let's not talk about Canada. Canada used to be considered boring. Now it's considered wicked. But the government gives you the Gibbs. What happens when the money runs out and the government can't give the Gibbs anymore? What possible reason would there be for anyone to defend Canada from internal insurrection or external invasion? I don't see any at all. Okay. Let's see. Let's talk about Senator Gillibrand. You know, she ran for president, Kristen Gillibrand. She ran for president. She made a gay potato in Iowa for the caucuses. Yeah, she made a gay potato. When she acceded to office, she seemed far more sensible than most Democrats in the Senate. But of course, there's an ethos there, and you have to embrace the ethos or you will be expelled. Senator Gillibrand of New York tweeted yesterday, paid leave is infrastructure, childcare is infrastructure, caregiving is infrastructure. This is the Post. Tamar Lappin's comments. Senator Kristen Gillibrand on Wednesday tried to redefine infrastructure and got torn down on social media for it. Infrastructure is generally defined as basic physical and organizational structures and facilities, such as buildings, roads, and power supplies. But in a push for President Biden's massive $2.3 trillion tax and spend plan, the New York Democrat attempted to pave a new meaning, tweeting paid leave is infrastructure, childcare is infrastructure, caregiving is infrastructure. The message drew a wall of mockery. Ben Shapiro wrote, unicorns are infrastructure, love is infrastructure, herpes is infrastructure, everything is infrastructure. Josh Barrow joked, mayonnaise is infrastructure, it supports the other flavors in the sandwich. That's better than what Ben Shapiro wrote. The bread is also infrastructure. Yes, who's that guy, Guy Fieri? Is that his name? I'm constantly seeing commercials for his Hawaiian bread, whatever Hawaiian bread is. I didn't know the Hawaiians were known for bread, which is in my local stores, by the way. And apparently you got to pay attention. You got to realize the importance of the bread layer, according to Guy Fieri. Barrow added the bread is also infrastructure, but the meat and cheese and tomatoes are not infrastructure, and making the sandwich is not infrastructure, but the plate is infrastructure. Many users noted if everything is infrastructure, then nothing is infrastructure. Jordan Weissman, a writer for Slate, made the case that we don't have to pretend every good thing is infrastructure. I am infrastructure, another Twitter user quipped. Republicans have argued that Biden's infrastructure proposal isn't actually infrastructure, arguing that it includes funds for things like long-term care services, manufacturing, and research and development. Biden argued for expanding the definition of infrastructure on Wednesday, saying that the idea has always evolved to meet the aspirations of the American people and their needs, and it is evolving again today. Could you give some examples of that, President Joe? Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg also defended the broader approach, noting that railroads used to be not considered infrastructure either. You are lying, Pete Buttigieg. What were railroads considered when they came to the United States in the 1830s? Were they considered like amusement park rides? Pete Buttigieg? There was a time when railroads weren't considered infrastructure, Buttigieg tweeted. Then we built them. Now it's time to build the 21st century economy Americans need. This is funny, but it's also not funny because the Biden administration is trying to sneak through universal child care through the back door. And universal child care is a bad thing for several reasons. The most important of which is that it provides an incentive, a very powerful and almost inescapable incentive for mothers to abandon raising their children and to join the workforce. And yes, and so then what? Government employees can then raise children just as communist used to be in communist countries. These government employees are not very fond of the children in their care. A secondary effect of this is, of course, what we saw, the great coalition between feminism and capitalism, that women were encouraged and later bullied into going into the workforce, which was very good news for the capitalists because it greatly lowered wages. There used to be something called the family wage. It's true that married men, particularly married men with children, got paid more than unmarried men, on the understanding that they needed the money more. But now it's just a race to the bottom. And as we found out, now was it Helen Lewis? I'm getting the name wrong. Sorry. That she pointed out in the book I reviewed a couple of weeks ago on boomers, that in 1920, for the first time, there were more women in the American workforce than men. So, universal child care, it's good for feminists, good for capitalists, not good for children. It's not good for women either, actually. In the category of war of all against all, we have this. Oh, yes. And how obnoxious can teachers and teachers' unions get? Thomas Lifson writes in the American Thinker, it's finally come to this, the last refuge for scoundrels in need of scapegoats. It's the Jews who are responsible for all the problems over school reopening. Don't let the ethnic identity of the accuser confuse you. If the word capo means nothing to you, ask someone who knows about Hitler's death camps. This is from the Washington Free Beacon. Union leader Randy Weingarten criticized Jews as part of the ownership class dedicated to denying opportunities to others in an interview released on Friday. Weingarten, who is herself Jewish and draws a six-figure salary as head of the American Federation of Teachers, took aim at American Jews in an interview with the Jerusalem Post. When asked about parents critical of the AFT's resistance to school reopening, Weingarten took aim squarely at Jewish critics. Quote, American Jews are now part of the ownership class. Jews were immigrants from somewhere else, and they needed the right to have public education. And they needed power to have enough income and wealth for their families that they could put their kids through college, and their kids could do better than they have done. When I hear that the question is that those who are in the ownership class now want to take that ladder of opportunity away from those who do not have it. Well, isn't it taking the ladder of opportunity away if the schools remain closed? Yes, the Jews are part of the ownership class now. I don't think that anyone is disputing that. But they want their children to be educated. If schools are closed, well, that's not possible. There's very few people. You'd have to be part of the super wealthy, I think, to afford private tutors for your children. I really have no idea what this Weingarten woman is on about. This is from Wikipedia. In 2007, Weingarten publicly announced she is a lesbian. Weingarten introduced Liz Margulies, 54, a psychotherapist and healthcare activist, as her partner, while accepting the Empire State Pride Agenda's 2007 Community Service Award from Christine Quinn, who was also a lesbian. By December 2012, she was in a relationship with Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah. They married March 25th, 2018. I kind of wonder whether this woman is going to survive this crisis. What do you think in the chat? Again, from American thinker Charles Turret, things we can live without. It must be pleasant to be a liberal. Every political principle fits on a bumper sticker. All problems can be chalked up to 1, racism, 2, capitalism, 3, global warming, or 4, Donald Trump. Liberals soak in a fragrant bubble bath of their own worldview. They need never hear a conservative message, but they won't shut up themselves. Like that obnoxious guy at the town meeting, they grab the microphone and won't put it down. The left can't resist the impulse to abuse those on the right at every opportunity. They don't even imagine us in the room. If we happen to be, they pay no mind. We endure leftist sensory overload every day. I'm doing my best to duck the abuse. I've had to give up a lot of things I once liked. And he starts with the National Football League and the Boston Red Sox, and then Major League Baseball, the NBA, popular music. Did you catch the Grammys? Carefully staged video portrayed police as murderers, contrary to known facts. I can live without rappers anointing themselves judge and jury as easily as I can live without Cardi B or whoever replaces her next year. Not a movie released by Hollywood misses the chance to lecture its audience on liberal politics. Television is a smaller version of the same. Johnny Carson and Jay Leno found ways to entertain the whole country for 5 decades. Today's late-night hosts battle for the viewership of half the nation by mocking the other half. It wasn't always this way. Michael Jordan contributed to Democratic candidates but chose not to campaign for them. Republicans buy sneakers too, he famously quipped. I don't believe he was motivated by greed. Jordan enjoyed being everyone's hero as much as we enjoyed his heroics. Why alienate every other fan? Leftist rot is seeping into unlikely crevices. Real Simple magazine, a glossy monthly that advises us on organizing closets, devoted its April family segment to the conversation everyone should have about climate change with the 15% of American deniers in readers' own families. It offered helpful strategies for badgering uncles who think it's a hoax, brothers who drive gas guzzlers, or your impressionable kids. The April edition of Bon Appetit, a respected periodical for serious home cooks, focused on the 1970s, a time of changing views on food. Editors couldn't resist lauding free breakfast programs run by the Black Panthers. A writer interviews Erica Huggins, instrumental in the effort to feed kids whose parents didn't. Huggins was also caught on tape in 1969, assisting with the kidnapping, torture, and murder of a Panther rival. Trumped-up charges, we're told. She served time for other offenses. She's now a university professor. Victory may depend, he concludes, on what we can live without. I can live without the abuse and whoever delivers it. Yeah. It seems difficult at first, giving these things up, but I've been surprised how easy it was. And I think others will be surprised as well. This is hardly a surprise. This is from Joshua Kaplan at Breitbart. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on Wednesday walked back his call for corporate America to stay out of politics after several big businesses publicly voiced opposition to Georgia's voter integrity law. Yes, McConnell had to accidentally discover that he'd grown a spine, and I suppose his donors and or China told him to stop doing that. And what are we going to talk about last? Oh, yes. This is from Not the Bee. This best-selling devotional has a prayer that it literally says, "Dear God, please help me to hate white people." This is a real book you can buy at Target. Ryan McAllister tweeted, "On Saturday, one of the members of my church sent me these images of a devotional she found in Target. This kind of thinking is a direct result of critical race theory and is completely anti-biblical." And this is from Prayer of a Weary Black Woman. Please help me to hate white people, or at least want to hate them. I want to stop caring about them individually and collectively, etc., etc. And who is responsible for this? It is written by Professor of Theology Shaniqua Walker Barnes of Mercer University. Walker Barnes specifies she doesn't mean the anti-racist woke whites, nor does she mean the neo-Nazi type. My prayer is that you would help me hate the other white people, the nice ones. Oh dear. What she really means is she hates white people of particular political affiliation. And then in her very next sentence, she admits she doesn't know many such people, but I'll bet she's heard the caricatures on CNN and has decided to stereotype tens of millions of people based on her personal blinders. My own view is that some people like some other people more than they do some other people. So if people admit to not liking members of A, B, or C, I don't particularly have a problem with that, so long as it is not expressed in calls for violence or murder. I understand that a lot of black people don't like white people. That's not really shocking to me. What I find disturbing, and again, I don't think that this situation can obtain for very long, that you get to say you're not particularly fond of A, B, or C, but we're not allowed to say that we're not particularly fond of any group except ourselves. Trust me, that is not going to hold. So apparently this is not a this is a mainstream opinion, and this book is selling very well as a Christian devotional book. I guess what the Church of Jesus Christ, the non-white or never white. Here's some good news. Senator Lindsey Graham is calling for an immigration moratorium. Hear, hear. Let's talk about the Kardashians or their disappearance. This is from Caitlin Becker for the Daily Mail. Keeping Up with the Kardashians is currently airing its final season on E! After well over a decade on the network. The reality series will conclude with an all-encompassing reunion special starring Kris, Kim, Khloe, Kourtney, Kendall, Kylie, and Scott, covering all 20 seasons and hosted by Andy Cohen, the most revolting man on television. That's me. That's not the Daily Mail. E! Released a promo video to announce the news that Andy Cohen and the Kardashian Jenners, using old footage from their FaceTime phone call prank from back in December. The promo video begins just like any other FaceTime prank video with the momager, that would be Kris. And just a reminder, okay, the momager sold a sex tape that Kim Kardashian had made, a sex tape that her daughter had made with a fellow called Ray J, who later became a reality star. And there was a lot of sex tapes floating around at the time, but of course, the sex tape got leaked. The people in the sex tape have to give permission or you can't make money off it. You can go to prison for that sort of thing. So we know that the momager, Kris, she arranged for contracts to be signed so that her daughter's sex tape would start the fame of the Kardashian family or of that generation. What was specifically notorious about this, although it was apparently not in the final cut, although many, many people were talking about it, supposedly at the end of the festivities, Ray J urinated on Kim Kardashian. Pretty transgressive, eh? And thus the notoriety of the Kardashians was born. And I'm looking at pictures here of Andy Cohen's depraved face. Ooh. Now, of course, this didn't start with the Kardashians. It started with Paris Hilton. That Paris Hilton is a woman of no known talent, although briefly she did have a singing career, and briefly she did have an acting career. The Kardashians have no pretensions to any of these things. They have no talent whatsoever, except as the MC in Paths of Glory at the end of the movie says, perhaps a little natural talent. But this is, ironically, what has made them so successful. If you watch, I don't know, American Idol or one of these shows, singing competitions, you might want to be, say, someone who wins that. But you think, well, I can't sing. Then I don't think I'd ever be able to sing. If you saw you're watching the Grammys and you saw some band that people love that was very successful, you could, well, I can't sing, but no, I can't play an instrument either. If you watch the Oscars and there are all of, the actors and actresses that we love, you might want to be like them, but then you think, I can't act. So this is why the Kardashians have been so successful, in that they are perfectly aspirational, in that there is nothing to have aspirations for except their fame. Their fame and their money. I mean, the phrase famous for being famous has been around a long time, but the Kardashians perfected this. They made it an art form. Now, presumably, the Kardashians are supposedly going to go away. Well, they're not going to go away by choice. Kim Kardashian and Kanye West are getting divorced? I cannot imagine that there's going to be a reality show about this. I suppose Kanye West, I mean, he doesn't have to take part. There's lots of images that can be, bought and paid for of him. There's lots of previous footage of him. I mean, if people stopped paying attention to the Kardashians, they would cease to exist. And I mean, they can't have that. We still get these newspaper stories about, Kris Jenner and her hot, much, much, much younger new boyfriend. How much money would any man have to be paid to have sex with Kris Jenner? It's a grim thought. But life is sad. Life is sad. And in more good news, of course, I've been predicting this for quite some time. This is from the U.S. Sun, like Charlotte Edwards. Hundreds of OnlyFans accounts have been targeted by hackers who leaked explicit content online. Bella Thorne is just one of the celebrities said to be targeted by the cyber criminals. The content is said to have appeared in a shared Google Drive that was posted in an online hackers forum. Researchers at cybersecurity firm BackChannel claimed to make the discovery. They've since created an online tool that aims to let OnlyFans creators check if their content was targeted. BackChannel said in late March, a link to a Google Drive folder was shared on a low-tier hacker forum by a threat actor known for collecting and exchanging sexually explicit material. The Google Drive folder contains videos and pictures stolen from hundreds of OnlyFans users. A quick search for Bella Thorne's account name comes back with a positive result and says the Disney star's content has been targeted. Oh dear. The Google Drive is said to contain private videos and images of lots of OnlyFans creators. It was shared to a hackers forum last month and is said to feature explicit content for celebrities and sex workers. Cardi B, Bella Thorne, and Megan Barton Hansen are just a few of the big names who use the platform to engage with fans. You don't need hackers for this. how do these people think that, well, the U.S. Sun, how do they think that stuff gets on torrent sites? In many cases, people who have copies of this, who have paid for copies of this, just load it up, and then it's available to everyone. If something is digital, it is going to be stolen, and it is going to be stolen repeatedly. But let's all cry some tears for Bella Thorne and the rest of the OnlyFans community. It's a sad, sad day. Oh, let's have a final look at the chat. All right. Many of them can't act either. Oh, yes. Random number generator says Paris Hilton's sister married a Rothschild. Paris Hilton was, or still is, for all I know, a human petri dish. Well, though she was gravely embarrassed. What was it, 10, 15 years ago? When stuff fell out of her purse, and there's that popular drug, which I cannot remain, the Valtrex, it's called, for the treatment of herpes. And of course, herpes is incurable. Well, the fifth thing I find strange about Paris Hilton is she has this one look, and it's not a particularly good look. I've seen pictures of Paris Hilton, for instance. She was imprisoned for some traffic offenses a few years ago, and she was released from prison, and she looked genuinely happy, and I thought, well, she's a pretty girl, and she doesn't have to have this obnoxious look, the same look in every picture that is taken of her. Gandalf White II says, Andy Cohen and the Kardashians, I'd rather watch trash being compacted. Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper were on CNN doing their New Year's show, and they actually talked about being Eskimo brothers. That's CNN, the first name in news. See, they were saying that they're both homosexuals, and they had each slept, had sex with the same man. Yes, again, CNN, the first name in news. Oh, we're talking about Jennifer Connelly. Yes, a particular favorite of mine. Oh, the horse scene from Career Opportunities. I saw that in the theaters when it came out, and every man in the audience, including me, their jaw had dropped and they were drooling. And then later I found out, I don't know, a few years later, that apparently Jennifer Connelly had been told she was fat. Now, if you see that scene or you see stills from that thing, she was not fat. But no, she starved herself from that time onwards, and ever since then, she has looked thin and unhappy. It's a sad case, many such cases as Alison Brie is another one. Alison Brie is another particular favorite of mine because of her work in Community and Mad Men. And then, a year ago, oh, my struggles with being fat. What, are you kidding me? You were never fat. Evil people, evil, envious people told you that you were fat. So, I think that's it. I think that is it. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow. First of all, thank you all for listening in, tuning in. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow is a Theater Thursday. And I am going to be discussing a recent film from 2019, directed by Andrew Patterson, called The Vast of Night. On the book club, we have a dystopian novel set in the year 2021. It's called The Children of Men by P.D. James. And as mentioned previously, it has an arresting opening. Earlier this morning, the 1st of January, 2021, 3 minutes after midnight, the last human being to be born on Earth was killed in a pub brawl. And on Music Monday, on April the 12th, I will be giving a primer on kraut rock. So if you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. if you would, I just remembered that it is the 1 year anniversary of me being kicked out of my apartment because of COVID hysteria. It's been 1 year. All my stuff has been in storage for 12 months now. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, always greatly appreciated, but especially at this juncture in my life, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream can be sent directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. To answer a question I asked, because the media doesn't do their job anymore, I see it reported here on Twitter that the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, will remain open in Ontario during the stay-at-home order. As always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and a civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.